somewhat powerful, but not as life-changing in non-OCD sufferers. These normal people have bad moments, not bad decades. On the contrary, for OCD sufferers, these buttons, or negative core beliefs, become life themes. These life themes take all the hope, power, and passion out of people's lives. Is your life theme based more on what you fear than what you hope for? Why do we believe and put so much faith in these big lies? Why are they so prevalent and powerful in those of us suffering from OCD? Well, I definitely have the answer to these questions. The answer is because we have only two different ways of thinking as human beings. Our two styles for processing information or thinking are 1, emotional thinking, and 2, logical thinking. These are the only ways a person can possibly think. These two different ways of thinking are entirely unrelated to each other. Let's start by understanding what emotional thinking involves and why it feels so real. It turns out that the majority of our thinking, perhaps 90%, is emotional thinking. This is because our brains developed and structured to use almost entirely emotional thinking in order to make decisions. Emotional thinking is king. Why has this turned out to be our dominant way of thinking, you may ask? In order to answer this question, a brief summary of the evolution development of the human brain is some things take place over a few years, like gaining weight, while other things take place over millions of years, such as brain development and evolution. The brain that you and I have is a brain that has evolved over millions of years. The human experience was primarily the same until just a few thousand years ago. There has been immense change during the last few thousand years. Based upon the effect of science and technology, society has changed while our brains have not changed much at all. In other words, you have primarily the same brain that a caveman or cavewoman had while living in a technologically advanced environment. We are generally cave people living in the future. So what are the pros and the cons of having this ancient brain, you may be asking yourself? The prehistorical brain primarily used emotional thinking because of the environment we had to survive in at that time. The reason the ancient brain, our brain, was so dependent on emotional thinking was that it was and still really is fast and safety focused as a black and white thinker. Our brain development has everything to do with how you think and process information. Our brain development was totally based on the environment we had to live and survive in then. The period in which our brains were developing was a terribly dangerous time for humans. We were not the fastest, the strongest, or the largest animal in the swamps, forests, and oceans. We were hunted daily by predators, which could easily kill us if we were not extremely safe. Yet, we were the smartest and most careful of all the animals around us. Is this starting to make sense? This is the reason today we are so afraid and often feel so vulnerable when we are anxious. Our ancestors that were not sensitive to anxiety were killed off by predators. Those of us more sensitive to anxiety and responsive to it are descended from the survivors of the ancient past. These ancestors were probably more sensitive and responsive to anxiety and scary thoughts. The higher primate brain was developing around 40 million years ago. The Homo sapien brain, the modern day human brain, began approximately 0.8 million years ago, or more simply 800,000 years ago. Not much at all has changed in the modern day human brain in the last 800,000 years. One of the unique faculties that we humans possessed, that other animals did not, was the ability to look into the future. We would try to control our survival outcomes by imagining all of the different possibilities of danger and death we could hopefully avoid. We would use our anxiety and fear to help us make these future decisions. If a thought made us anxious, then we considered it an important idea. We then acted on that thought as if it was a reality. If we felt uneasy about the future, then we assumed we had not figured out every possible threat and were still in considerable danger. We would allow ourselves to stop worrying if and only if we felt less anxious or fearful about our future situation. We humans would valiantly try to cheat and get ahead of ourselves to control the anxiety and uncertainty about the future. When we try to be psychics and read the future, we begin to use what-if thinking or emotional thinking to give us some feeling of control over the future, which can cause an instant reduction in doubt, uncertainty, and anxiety, which thus makes us feel safe and in control of future danger. Naturally, this thinking about the future led to higher survival rates as humans learned that they could look into the future and predict hundreds of different scenarios in which they could be killed and then try to avoid those situations, or at least be more prepared for it. This leads to pessimistic thinking, focused on staying alive and not dying. When death is the focus, there is not much room for risk-taking. This is where black and white thinking with danger originated. Those that take too many risks end up dying and often do not pass on their DNA to the next generation. Therefore, risk-taking is felt like an all-or-nothing issue. So when it comes to life and death, there can be no level of risk-taking because it just feels wrong instinctually at a gut level. This is because we are the relatives of the scared humans that were extremely cautious and careful in all matters. We are afraid because our ancestors had to be scared to survive from day to day. The risk-takers and optimists, on average, died at a much higher frequency and are not represented among us today. Emotional thinking makes us equate optimism and risk-taking with death. Therefore, our intrusive thoughts feel like a warning about that something bad is about to happen unless we do something special so it won't happen. Thus, we engage in a compulsion. A feeling has to be black or white. Otherwise, it would have no meaning. Feelings are truly binary in nature, either positive or negative. Emotional thinking is extremely fast and very black and white.